all-knowing and all-powerful, starting with the elderly wolf uncle. Chapter 65. This figure is Clark. After Chen Tian copied his Krypton bloodline, he fell into the downwind again. It can't be like this. He stood up abruptly and muttered. Yet the moment Clark stood up, Chen Tian, who should have been thousands of meters apart, had already turned into a high-speed blurry afterimage and flashed in front of him. Meanwhile, a white, slender hand with distinct bones suddenly wrapped in countless winds and airflow, and quickly reached out and pinched Clark's neck. Damn! Clark felt a terrifying force coming from his neck, and his feet gradually moved off the ground. Chen Tian's expression was calm. He lifted the other party into the air, looked at him, and slowly tightened the force on his fingers. Suddenly time. Clark only felt a terrifying sense of room surrounding him. Not only physically, but also psychologically. You're still too weak, Chen Tian spoke coldly. As soon as the words fell, he snatched it up and smashed it to the ground. Rumble. The earth-shattering roar spread out between heaven and earth in an instant, and the entire earth trembled, and a thick dust and fog swept up in the sky. After Clark's strong weightlessness, he felt his whole back hit the ground. The terrifying aftermath suddenly transmitted along Clark's body into the ground below him. Suddenly time. The land cracked, and the dense cracks like cobwebs spread out in an instant. At this time, the underground rock formation could not withstand the huge impact, collapsed in an instant, flew around, and picked up from the ground. Clark, who was pinched by Chen Tian's neck and pressed to the ground, suddenly burst out and wanted to resist. But was surprised to find that he couldn't use his strength under the oppression of the other party. Clark, who noticed this, looked more complicated under his eyes for a while. Chen Tian's ability is all copying his own. However, in this situation, he was actually not Chen Tian's opponent. Thinking about it, at the bottom of Clark's heart, a trace of shock spread, and his expression changed greatly when he looked at Chen Tian. Clark, no. Chen Tian looked at Clark, whose face changed, narrowed his eyes, and said softly. Followed by, the muscles in his body suddenly swelled and tightened, knotting like the roots of an old tree, erupting with terrifying power. Lift the Clark in your hand again and throw it out hard. Rumble. Clark's entire burly and strong body turned into an off-string arrow at this moment, and smashed uncontrollably towards the mountain made of layers of rocks in the distance. The moment his body came into contact with the mountain, it should obviously be an extremely heavy and solid mountain, but at this moment, it is like a bubble that easily cracks and explodes. In the violent tremor of the ground, only endless rock fragments could be seen rolling and collapsing, burying Clark's entire body. One by one, smoke and dust like wolf smoke rushed out from the gap between the debris of the mountain, blocking a large area of the sky. Chen Tian calmly looked at the scene in front of him. Although it can be said that Chen Tian is a heavy hand every time, he is not worried about killing the other party. On Earth without kryptonite, there is no way to kill Clark. After all, he is a Superman with a super Kryptonian bloodline and an indestructible steel body. Of course, now on the Earth, he is not the only one who has a man of steel. And now Chen Tian. With the ability to replicate, he is equal to Clark not only in terms of strength, but also in terms of future potential. Even, because of the particularity of the copying ability, Chen Tian's potential is still above the Great Chao. After all, he can copy infinitely. It may even be possible to fuse bloodlines, such as Doomsday superimposed on Krypton bloodlines. If this could be done, I can't imagine what would have happened. At that time, it doesn't matter whether the DC universe or the Marvel universe. No matter which parallel world, in terms of potential and future ceiling, Chen Tian can become a top-notch existence. At this moment, the pile of boulders that buried Clark exploded. Sure enough. Although at this moment, his body was covered with dust, all his clothes were almost torn, and he looked embarrassed on the outside, but in fact, his body did not receive much damage. Clark stared at Chen Tian with a complicated expression, an extremely complex luster flowed under his eyes, and he didn't know what to think about in his heart. Do you want to continue? Chen Tian looked at each other with a smile, his eyes were like clear lake water, there were not many waves actually. He had no hostility towards Clark. And the latter, in the previous engagement, can also feel this. Therefore, Clark, who had now almost reached the limit, only reacted at this time, as if the teenager in front of him had been saying words attacking himself. But the actual purpose is to help you realize your potential. Moreover, it really let Chen Tian do it. Now Clark has not only risen to a higher level in strength, but also awakened several new abilities. He's actually helping me? Clark couldn't help but mutter, thinking back to everything he had just experienced. Looking at Chen Tian's eyes, it suddenly became more and more complicated. Because, the picture of this teenager easily pinching Jerome to death before is still vividly remembered. Until now, although Clark's heart had vaguely felt that Chen Tian's statement also had some truth. But before, Clark, who had always insisted on not hurting others. Obviously, it is not easy to directly change the idea that has been maintained for more than 10 years in one day. Therefore, he is now entangled, in a trance. Clark feels the chaotic thoughts in his mind, coupled with the exhaustion of his body. And directly sits on the ground that is shattered because of the battle just now. Then, there was a sound of footsteps in his ears. Clark looked up and saw Chen Tian with a smile on his face, walking over and overlooking him condescendingly. It's over. Chen Tian smiled lightly and slowly spoke. Clark was silent when he heard this, and his thoughts were so chaotic that he couldn't find the slightest clue. What exactly is right? He couldn't help but think. Then, all the things he had experienced before flashed in front of his eyes again. Clark's heart became more and more chaotic, and he couldn't find the slightest answer. The expression on his face also became depressed and annoyed. With a super brain, he rarely has such emotions. Because he has a strong management of his emotions. However, in these short 2 days, what happened turned into a torrent, hitting Clark one after another, and has maintained the 3 views for more than 10 years. This dazed experience made him extremely uncomfortable. Chen Tian felt the other party's emotions, smiled slightly, and suddenly felt that Clark in this period was a little cute. There is no difference at all with the ordinary big boy who grows up, sees more and more things, and then falls into confusion and can't find his way for a short time. In the world, except in the eyes of children, where is there so much pure good and evil? I hope Clark understands this sooner. Thinking. Chen Tian stretched out his hand and put it in front of Clark. Clark was stunned, looked up at him, shook his head helplessly and grabbed the hand and stood up. It's not over yet, he said a little stubbornly. First chapter, previous chapter 65, 186, next chapter, epilogue, table of contents.